Welcome back to Geographics. My name is Shannon, and today we're talking about the Jefferson Memorial, honoring a complicated revolutionary. And today's script is brought to you by James C.J. Memorializing leaders is as old as organized civilization itself. In the United States, countless leaders from its 250-year history have been honored in numerous ways, from presidents and soldiers to activists, visionaries, and anyone else whose contributions shaped a nation still learning what it stands for. What it looks like to be honored is different depending on the figure. Some are subtle, based on a stamp or plaques, a bust, or maybe a small statue. Others are grander. It's often the presidents who find themselves with the grandest monuments, and one such monument exists in Washington, D.C. for Thomas Jefferson. On the south side of the National Mall, along the edge of the tidal basin, lies the Jefferson Monument, a beautiful neoclassical structure honoring the founding father and third president of the United States. Its location is symbolic, lying in a straight axis with the White House and the Washington Monument, tying Jefferson to the city's monumental core. While you might think the Jefferson Memorial has just always been around, it's easy to forget just how young the monument truly is. For most of the 19th century, Jefferson was actually overshadowed by George Washington, whose legacy was larger than life. It was also a tumultuous century for the nation as a whole. So, how did Jefferson finally earn his place among the nation's greatest monuments? The story of the Jefferson Memorial is one of vision, politics, and controversy, as most things in DC are. Thomas Jefferson is among the most important members of the Founding Fathers. He was a member of this famed group of political leaders, radical thinkers, and revolutionaries who led the charge in declaring independence on July 4th, 1776, and then created the foundation for the newly created nation that emerged following their acknowledged separation from Great Britain in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris, thus ending the Revolutionary War. You don't have to think long and hard about why someone like Thomas Jefferson would be memorialized. Let's start with perhaps the most obvious reason, the Declaration of Independence. This was and remains one of the most critical documents in American history. The Declaration of Independence announced the 13 colonies' decision to sever their ties with British rule. Several people authored this document, but its primary author is considered to be Thomas Jefferson. Following the establishment of the United States as an independent nation, Jefferson became its first Secretary of State, then its second Vice President under John Adams, and finally its third President. In his political career, which spanned 4 decades from 1769 to 1809, Jefferson amassed numerous notable achievements that furthered the United States, shaping it into what it is today. As Secretary of State, he furthered ties with France, which was very beneficial to a young nation. He fought for religious liberty, doubled the U.S. territory, secured control of the Mississippi River and New Orleans through Louisiana Purchase in 1803, commissioned the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1804, reduced the national debt by controversially reining in military spending, founded the University of Virginia, and much more. He had a vision for America, a vision for democracy, education, and individual rights, making him one of the most influential leaders the U.S. would ever see. While it seems obvious that Jefferson would be memorialized in such fashion, it is important to note that it wasn't always guaranteed that the monument that stands today would house the founding father. Jefferson had long been admired following his death on July 4th, 1826, on the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, as it were. However, despite an obvious legacy, no movement was made to memorialize the former president and founding father. Instead, the century was consumed with other monuments, the War of 1812 and the Civil War, among other tumultuous events. Consider this, the Washington Monument, meant to honor one of America's most important leaders, was not funded or overseen by Congress for the majority of its construction efforts. Instead, it was haphazardly managed by civilians, funded through donations, leading to it being constantly underfunded and almost scrapped entirely. It wasn't until Congress and the Army Corps of Engineers took over that project that it was finished in 1884 after a total of 30 years of construction. It's far from surprising that no monument for Jefferson was even a consideration at the time, and it didn't help that Jefferson was overshadowed by George Washington and Abraham Lincoln in the pantheon of national heroes, one for his role as the first president, and the other for his role in the Civil War and his assassination, prompting his own memorial in D.C. For the majority of the 19th century, Jefferson's legacy was honored and memorialized elsewhere, like his home, Monticello, which became a site of pilgrimage, and the University of Virginia, which continued his educational legacy. However, the 20th century would see Thomas Jefferson honored on a national level in numerous ways, both on a side of a mountain and the nation's capital. Yet, as with all things in Washington, D.C., it was far from straightforward. At the dawn of the 19th century, despite Jefferson's fame, he had yet to be honored like other former presidents and leaders. The McMillan Plan, proposed in 1901, would be the key to Jefferson's eventual monument. It was a comprehensive plan, furthering its efforts to beautify D.C., and it called for measures such as limiting building heights and positioning new structures and monuments throughout the city to create a balanced aerial composition. While the plan was never formally adopted by the United States, many of its provisions were in fact implemented. One suggestion was the creation of the Parthenon-like structure where the Jefferson Memorial now stands. In fact, there was no specific designation for whom it should honor. While it was discussed in the early years of the 20th century, nothing actually happened, and wouldn't for several more decades. Instead, the area of the tidal basin along the Potomac continued to be a popular spot for residents of D.C. who enjoyed it as a park. With the completion of the Tidal Basin Inlet Bridge in 1908, recreational use of the East and West Potomac parks naturally increased. With the addition of chlorine dispensers in 1918, the water in the tidal basin became suitable for swimming, which gave birth to Tidal Basin Beach, which opened in August that same year as a whites-only facility. In the 1920s, Congress began arguing over whether or not they should fund an African-American beach along the Potomac. This then raised a concern among lawmakers that this would lead to efforts to integrate the Tidal Basin Beach. Oh no! Instead of allowing such a thing to happen, the beach was closed to all in 1925, because we'd rather pour cement into our pools than share, I guess. Great. You just spent all this time fixing up this area. You spent so much money, and you're like, but what if Black people want to use it? It's so dumb. The same year Tidal Beach was closed for good, a design competition was held to come up with a worthy use of the space in West Potomac Park along the edge of the tidal basin. The competition was not to design a monument for Jefferson, but instead for another president, Theodore Roosevelt. The design, which ultimately won the competition, was created by John Russell Pope. However, similar to the McMillan Plan of 1901, it wasn't adopted by Congress. Then, in 1926, the 69th Congress introduced a resolution to authorize the creation and erection of a memorial to Jefferson. However, this would stall almost immediately. The advent of the Great Depression by the end of the decade further delayed any discussions of a memorial for the third president. It wouldn't be until 1934 that talks of a monument would come up yet again. This time, Jefferson had an admirer in the White House, a president ready, willing, and able to ensure that his legacy was honored. This was it. Jefferson would finally be honored after more than a century after his death in 1826. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt ascended to the presidency, he had a monumental task on his hands. He needed to curb unemployment, fix Wall Street, and regain the trust of the people. Never mind the fact that all the while a fascist uprising in Germany is clearly taking shape. You might think this is a terrible time to build a monument. However, in Roosevelt's eyes, the timing was perfect. Part of his New Deal was providing jobs through government-financed public works projects like post offices, dams, airports, roads, hospitals, and in some cases, monuments. Roosevelt was a big fan of Jefferson's, and it is this admiration that is mainly responsible for reviving the project of creating a monument for the influential figure. Through his inquiries about a potential monument, Congressman John J. Boylan brought the issue to Congress, urging those to vote to create the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Commission to commission a design for a potential monument. Congress appropriated $3 million, worth roughly $72 million today. Boylan was chosen to be chairman of the committee, obviously, and an architect was chosen to design the future monument. John Russell Pope, who designed the Roosevelt Monument that never came to fruition, was chosen to design Jefferson's memorial. His work in D.C. was noteworthy, already having designed numerous buildings in Washington, including the National Archives. Before the spot in West Potomac Park was officially chosen, Pope designed several different plans for the monument in several locations around D.C., including on the Anacostia River, at Lincoln Park, across from the National Archives on the south side of the National Mall and at the site on the tidal basin. In the end, the tidal basin site was chosen and it completed the Macmillan Commission's 4-point plan encompassing the region, including the Lincoln Memorial, the U.S. Capitol, the White House, and finally the future home of the Jefferson Memorial. At the end of 1938, after what seemed like a century in the making, construction finally began on the Jefferson Memorial. On November 15, 1939, the cornerstone was laid by Roosevelt himself, as John Russell Pope, the architect of the memorial, had sadly passed away the year prior. Building the Jefferson Memorial was not as difficult as some of the other monuments that had been in Washington, but it wasn't without its detractors. The question was, how much would it impact the overall construction? The Jefferson Memorial took far less time to build than some of the other monuments in the United States. But despite this, it wasn't without controversy or issues. The very day that construction began on the memorial, a group of 80 women marched on the White House. They were fired up, armed with a petition seeking to stop the construction of the Jefferson Memorial due to their concerns that the cherry trees in the area would be uprooted by construction. The following day, 150 women chained themselves to the cherry trees, aiming to halt work on the memorial, and with it, the event went down in history as the Cherry Tree Rebellion. This campaign began long before they broke ground on the memorial, but it was the culmination of their fight, which had been festering since 1934 when talks of the memorial began. The women chained to the trees disrupted the Civilian Conservation Corps' effort to transplant the trees. It led to a temporary suspension of work. However, due to the refusal of FDR to stand down on the issue, the women eventually backed off, allowing work to commence uninterrupted. The cherry trees are huge in DC. It's a whole thing. The Cherry Tree Rebellion was only one of the many controversies surrounding the project. Some complained that it was the wrong time to be constructing a costly memorial while the nation was still struggling with the Great Depression. Some were angry that no open design competition was held and that John Russell Pope was just selected, angering the architectural community. If it weren't for FDR's unwavering support for the project, it's unclear if it would have been able to withstand all the obstacles in its way. Another issue came with the death of architect John Russell Pope. His vision for the monument was significantly larger and grander than the one that stands today. However, the Commission of Fine Arts had never approved any design for the Jefferson Memorial and opposed both the site and design that had been presented. When the site ended up remaining the same, the Commission of Fine Arts was able to get a more conservative design made up for the memorial, which stayed true to Pope's vision and design, but on a less grandiose scale. The main changes resulted in a more compact footprint for the overall monument, as opposed to the sprawling, oversized temple complex initially presented, with fewer colonnades, less ornamentation, better proportions, and greater adherence to neoclassical design. At the ceremony laying the cornerstone on November 15, 1939, a copy of the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, the 10-volume writings of Thomas Jefferson, Jefferson's own book, The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, and the most recent editions of 4 major newspapers published in the city were placed in the hollow cornerstone. On April 13, 1943, the 200th anniversary of Jefferson's birthday, the memorial was officially completed. Considering this was during the height of World War II, the monument became a symbol of America's resilience, democracy, and the continued fight against tyranny. FDR even made the connection in his dedication of Jefferson's ideals and the time they were currently living in with World War II and the threat of fascism and tyranny. It was an apt memorial for a dark time in human history. When John Russell Pope designed the Jefferson Memorial, he deliberately drew from the past to honor one of America's great figures. He also considered Jefferson's own taste to create a design that he'd enjoy. Jefferson was a known admirer of Greek and Roman ideals, historians, and philosophers. He was also a lover of classical architecture, which is reflected in the overall design of the Jefferson Memorial. Finally, he considered Jefferson's contributions and vision for the University of Virginia, with his design of the rotunda, which acts as the centerpiece of the academic institution. With all these, Pope set out to design a memorial worthy of Washington, D.C.'s aesthetic image and Jefferson's memory. The finished monument was a circular, open-air building inspired by the Pantheon in Rome. It featured a shallow dome, which was supported by a circular colonnade composed of 26 Ionic columns. To To support the north portico, 12 additional columns were added. Finally, 4 columns stand at each of the monument's 4 openings. The Pantheon-like form rises from a broad square platform, flanked by 2 smaller colonnaded wings. A series of granite and marble terraces steps down towards the tidal basin, reinforced by granite buttresses. The grand staircase that leads up from the water makes the approach to the Jefferson Memorial almost ceremonial, as if those visiting are ascending into a temple of democracy. The entire exterior of the monument is clad in white imperial Danby marble from Vermont, tying it to many other great monuments in Washington. The open colonnades, as opposed to solid walls, create a sense of transparency and accessibility, an almost symbolic reflection of Jefferson's Enlightenment ideals. Above the portico, a triangular pediment features a sculpture by Adolph A. Weinman. The work of art depicts the Committee of Five who drafted the Declaration of Independence. It features Jefferson in the middle, standing, while the other 4 members, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman, are sitting. The sculpture has the committee submitting their report to Congress, which was, of course, the Declaration of Independence. It was clear that Pope wanted this monument to make a statement, to stand on its own and not get lost in a sea of monuments that featured heavily in the US Capitol. With that in mind, he'd achieved just that from the outside, but what about within? Stepping into the Jefferson Memorial is like walking into the mind of the man it honors. The heart of the space features a 19-foot bronze statue of Jefferson himself, standing tall and resolute, facing north, the direction of the White House and the Washington Monument. In his hand, he holds a document, and while one might think it's the Declaration of Independence, it's not entirely clear what the document in his left hand is. Sculptor Rudolph Evans designed it to look as if Jefferson was presenting one of his own writings, and which one that is entirely up to the person looking at the statue. The National Park Service interprets it as representative of all of his writings. At the back of the statue, Jefferson's love of the land and agriculture, along with his interests in education, are expressed with a stack of books and stalks of corn. The statue was added 4 years after the dedication. Due to World War II, which coincided with the consideration and construction of the memorial, there was a material shortage of bronze, which was being used for machinery, weapons, and military supplies. It was seen as wasteful to use such a precious resource for a statue when it was clearly needed elsewhere. So, while the memorial was dedicated on April 13, 1943, the statue simply wasn't ready. In its place, a plaster version of the statue was added, painted to resemble bronze, which remained until the permanent statue was finished and presented to the public. In 1947, the bronze statue we all know today was brought in to replace the plaster version, completing the memorial, which had been almost 2 decades in the making. While the outside used marbles sourced from Virginia, the interior used a variety of marbles from other parts of the nation. The walls and columns were made using Georgia white marble, while the floors were made using a Tennessee pink marble. The interior of the monument is 129 feet tall, with the dome's interior made of Indiana limestone. It's divided into 2 parts, with the upper section having a smooth and uninterrupted surface, while in contrast, the lower section has a coffered surface and contains lights illuminating the main attraction, the statue of Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson's statue doesn't impose on the space, but feels balanced to the open-air surroundings, which is meant to reinforce the belief in freedom. The dome makes you look up and reminds visitors that this is a temple. It's a place of reflection. The frieze below the dome features a quote from Jefferson, echoing the sentiment of a nation stating, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal, hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." This was quoted from a letter Jefferson sent to Benjamin Rush on September 23, 1800, when defending the constitutional refusal to recognize a state religion. There are 4 other inscriptions inside the memorial, carving out Jefferson's beliefs and ideals into stone: equality, liberty, education, and the fight against tyranny through an excerpt from the Declaration of Independence. This monument, while commemorating a man, also enshrines a set of principles that the United States was built on and is meant to be guided by. All of these things combined show Jefferson's legacy isn't just political, but intellectual. It's a legacy of ideas that continue to challenge and inspire. Work work to take care of the memorial continues, ensuring it remains a shining beacon to democracy and the legacy of a nation still fighting to achieve the ideals set by Jefferson. In the 21st century, the monument has undergone preservation work to replace leaking roofs, lift marble tiles to restore watertight integrity, stabilize stone, and employ high-tech cleaning like laser treatments to remove dark biofilm. The United States is a complex country, like most, and it's still trying to understand its own history, taking into account the nuance. Jefferson, like his country, was a complicated man. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, and in it stated, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Despite this, he owned slaves. While he held the belief that it was morally wrong to do so, he still benefited from its existence and perpetuated it throughout his political and economic actions. And it should be remembered that Jefferson drafted a law in 1769 that made it legal to free slaves in Virginia, but only enacted it 13 years later. But during his time, both helping craft the framework of the Constitution and as vice president and later president, he never moved to abolish slavery. The reason is that the founders knew their young nation was still fragile, still in its early days, and the issue of slavery was contentious. So, to achieve national unity, they compromised on the issue and chose to leave it to future generations to handle. But Jefferson and likely many others knew that when the time came, it wouldn't be pretty. It's with all this that the National Park Service expanded its educational material on Jefferson to try and show a more complete picture of a complicated figure. Over the course of the last few decades, the US has gone through a tremendous shift in reevaluating who they've honored and why. It's led to the removal of statues, the name changes of streets, parks, military bases, and more. With that, monuments like the Jefferson Memorial were not exempt. Some argue the space should be reinterpreted, some want alterations in context panels, and surely some want it removed altogether. Of course, this is unlikely to happen. Instead, the best path forward is understanding who is being honored in their entirety, acknowledging both the good and the bad, as well as all of the contradictions that follow. History and its important figures are never as black and white as one might hope. They're always a collection of intentions, good and bad, contradictions, and firmly held beliefs. The Jefferson Memorial is at its core a symbol of America's founding principles, a reminder of freedom, democracy, and intellectual curiosity, and it's also a place of reflection, part of an ongoing dialogue of the country he helped create, the beliefs and ideals he held, and how much we've achieved those ideals or how far we've strayed. Today, the memorial challenges visitors to examine and reflect on the ideals of democracy, how they evolve over time, and how the fight to preserve them never ends. Well, thanks for tuning in today to learn about the Jefferson Memorial. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification if you want to know when we have new videos going live, and I will see you guys later. Bye!